Hey guys, welcome to book review number 100. Yay! Today I will be reviewing The Sex Lives of Cannibals, Adrift in the Equatorial Pacific. I know that's backwards, but that's what it says. So this book is by Maarten Troost, and what it's about is it's about his, I believe, year or 2 years in Equatorial as sort of the tag-along husband to his wife in a volunteer opportunity there. I believe I've actually pronounced that wrong to start the review. It's Kiribati, and the Kiribati are the people of the island. Kiribati is a island nation about halfway between Samoa and the United States state of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. Just a couple little facts about it before I get into the review, and that kind of reflected what it was. The Pacific Islands are largely split into two types of islands. One, the Pacific Atolls, those being low-lying sandy islands that are typically in a circular or enclosed-in shape around what used to be volcanoes, and essentially they're created by coral that's built up along the rim. The second type, that's not part of this book, is the high islands, which are created by volcanoes, either active or extinct, such as like the Hawaiian Islands or Tahiti or something like that. So Kiribati is an island, not just one atoll, but an island completely made up of atolls, of low-lying atolls. And so Maarten Troost goes to this island, finds that its capital, Tarawa, I believe I have that correct, is not as pristine as the stereotype of the Pacific island might be. Far from being lightly populated, like a paradise, slowly, where man is free to his own thoughts. Actually, Tarawa is one of the most densely populated areas and capitals in the entire world. The reason it's not known is because the capital only has about 30 or 40,000 people, but it's on a tiny, tiny landmass that is very, like, atolls are very long. They're like these long strips of sand, but from one side to the other might be a couple hundred yards. And that's literally, it's like one road for the entire island. I mentioned it was coming in to the island. It was very similar to the Marshall Islands in its kind of like overcrowdedness. And something that he mentioned, kind of a weird combination, was the stink. There was no sort of indoor plumbing, or what there was very hit and miss. And also it being very hot led to what people essentially use as the toilet is the reefs. Well, what would happen is people would go out on the reefs, take their shits, as they would. These are large people, being Pacific Islanders for the most part. And when the tide went down, all the shit would just bake on the reef, and you get this shit flavor or shit smell. And then there would be like the dead dogs. He mentioned that he called the book "The Sex Lives of Cannibals," if I could get it right. And he briefly mentions the cannibalistic aspect of the island, the history of cannibalism of the island. But actually the largest cannibals on the island, and probably the largest, most frequent sexual beings, if you will, were dogs. Sorry about that. And other types of, sorry, I got a little distracted, were dogs that ate one another. If there was a weak member of the pack, they would die. Some people kept dogs as pets, mostly as guard dogs, which were vicious enough in themselves. But probably the majority of dogs were feral dogs. Were dogs that just mangy, feral, fur falling off, full of fleas and worms and ticks and all sorts of nastiness, eating one another, attacking other dogs, attacking humans. He mentioned that he often had to have rocks on this island and throw them at him so he wouldn't get bit by these dogs. What are some other things? He mentions the alcoholism, which is a major problem on the island. What else? I don't want to get too much into alcoholism because the second book that I just read largely deals with his alcoholism that kind of came to fruition 10 years later. But this is before any of that all happened. Or at least before it kind of truly manifested itself. He kind of mentioned some of the nice things. I guess I started with the bad things just to kind of break the idyllic image. You know, he mentions that if you went to the right spots, there was the palm fronds, there was the clear beaches if you got kind of away from the city. He mentions that the weather, far from being like what you would think of like on Hawaii, that's nice but pleasant, it was actually hot all the time, very, very hot. Trash was a major issue. See, I'm going back negative again. Trash was a major issue. What else? Dogs, trash. Kind of, you hate to use the stereotype of laziness because when you do that as a group, it's a problem. But if you were to look at sort of the unemployment rates of people in the islands or partially employment rates, yeah, it would be what it was, which was people were largely unemployed or to a greater degree underemployed, where they were just kind of doing jobs as friends and favors for family and whatnot. Just kind of odds and ends task rather than actually having a Western productive day. You know, that's another thing I'll talk about is kind of the missionaries and stuff. But from what we would view in the Lutheran tradition as productive, you know, hands in the earth kind of thing, you know, it kind of lacked that. Let's see, what else? Oh, he mentioned the corruption that was pretty endemic within Kiribati, now, or Kiribati, I should pronounce it correctly. Now, something that should be said here is we typically think of corruption as like Vladimir Putin, as like taking millions and millions of dollars off some sort of boondoggle, you know, governmental dam scheme or hydroelectric or, you know, coal plant or whatever, and just skimming money off the top. Now, largely the economy, if you went by the strict definition, largely the case, the entire economy of Kiribati would work that way, in that people are more likely to do things for favors than they are for money, and you're more likely to kind of grease the wheels by people you know. Now, to a degree, that kind of keeps a traditional island culture, but at the same time, it kind of it keeps the bonds in place that allow people to not become disassociated with each other like they have maybe in the West some. I mean, you are watching on a computer right now, and I do not know you. But at the same time, it prevents the income of technology, kind of even like simple changing of ways, not like some sort of vast sea change, but, you know, say something simple as like a trash collection system, or you know, he mentioned that there was, because the island is long and narrow, all you need is one sort of pipeline that runs the length of the island, and that was in place. But the problem was because of kind of corruption within the system, sometimes the water plant pump worked and sometimes it didn't. The pipes would get replaced by people you know, not because you would request into the government that you have an old rusty pipe that needs to be replaced so you can get water to your house. He mentioned that because of this, he would often have to get a truck with one of those big, like, I don't know, I'm going to say like 100-liter, 200-liter big water barrels, and have to truck water to his house. They would have to use rainwater stills, which was kind of a common thing. Let's see. What else? He did mention the, you know, the dancing. He likes a lot of the traditional stuff, particularly the high energy. He felt that, see, you're getting into stereotypes. I guess I'm not afraid of the negativity because it was directly pointed out, but even when it's correct, when it's seen as like a stereotype, like the, oh, there's such, there's so much more energy in the dancing, and vitality of life. Well, am I being condescending by saying that, or is it the truth? You know, and then to a degree, it is the truth. I mean, it's what he observed. It's what J. Maarten Troost saw. So, let's see. Kind of, yeah, this is not a real. I think I'm going to leave this one pretty short. I've covered most of what he covered in here. Let's see. Let's look at the chapters. In which the author, in case anyone was wondering what exactly he was doing on Tarawa while his girlfriend Toyle discussed his plan for making productive use on his time on the atoll. He mentioned that he tried to write a novel here and that failed, which, you know, happens to the best of us. They went to some of the outer islands, which had not even the rudimentary trappings of kind of Western civilization. But what they would have is they would have the trappings of Western production. So they wouldn't even have like on the outer islands rudimentary like water pump line. But damn, would you get high fructose corn syrup produced, or high amount of high processed corn. Well, that's what high fructose corn syrup is. Cheese puffs, potato chips, junk food. And because they were so prevalent, because largely like food programs were dumped on the island and they didn't always look out for the islanders' health when doing this, there was a massive diabetes and overweight problem on the islands. And that would include Tarawa as well as the outer islands, but the outer islands didn't even have some of the trappings of, you know, the positivity of Western civilization. Let's see, what else? Kind of breezed through a lot of this. Which the author discussed foreign aid. Yeah, he mentioned that, you know, even though the average salary of somebody in Tarawa or Kiribati might be couple $1,000 a year, in one trip, and even not an expensive trip, just a basic trip, that a UN aid program, or any sort of aid program, I shouldn't just single out the UN, but any sort of like developmental aid program, they'll spend that no problem and have no qualms and no guilt about it. And he was actually kind of cracked the whip a little bit about that like these people are largely, they do help the islanders, but they look out for their, it's at least questionable what their interests are in terms of, are they looking to just have like a plush, easy job that they get to go to $100 fundraiser banquets for, or they actually salt and earth, getting down to what will help the Kiribati people out. Let's see. Oh, he mentions, glad I saw this, flying Air Kiribati, which is, he said the planes actually didn't have wings that were parallel to each other. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, a couple of the ships that the government used as like ferries between the islands, one of them sank and just a bunch of people died. He mentioned they went out on a fishing trip on a private boat, where it was kind of hair-raising, going through the channel tides or whatever. But he mentioned a separate story where somebody was actually trapped for like 30 days out on this little tiny fishing boat with an outboard motor in order to you know, like the outboard motor died and then they were just stuck. And he mentioned that whereas in the United States, if that had happened, there'd be helicopters and people would be freaking out and it'd be all over the news. They'd send in the National Guard. People in Kiribati were just largely like, it's island time. I guess we'll just have to wait and see when it actually happens. Let's see, what else? I feel that that's largely it. I covered most of, I'm sure I missed like a whole bunch of stuff. It's doing on Tarawa. You get a nice view of the title page right here. Space-time continuum, strange tales of, oh yeah, there was a drunkard that had no poetic license, or was really not a poet, was really just a fraud. But because Kiribati is kind of a naive country and they think that people in England are, you know, all powerful, essentially convinced, J. Martin Troost is in English, but the guy that was the author was, convinced the Kiribati that he could be the poet laureate of the island, and just mooched off the island for like 2 years before he got so drunk that they kicked him out and eventually made him go back to, deported him back to his crummy life in England. Dogs, I definitely talked about the dogs up front. His girlfriend's working in a trash thing. She's actually an on the ground kind of person. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm kind of stalling out, so that's a good indicator that you need to say The Sex Lives of Cannibals, Adrift in the Equatorial Pacific by Maarten Troost. Check it out, you guys. Bye.